welcome back to the second session of the Bruegel annual meeting, 20 years anniversary. It's my pleasure to host and chair this session on the future of Europe's defense. And welcome back. Please take your seats. We have a splendid panel here to discuss the strategic outlook and the future of European defense. And, before I introduce my speakers, let me just give you a few introductory remarks. The first point I wanted to make is that we are, and we discussed in the first panel already, that we are at a turning point at a very difficult moment in the history of the European continent. And I think one reason why it is so difficult certainly is the security situation on the European continent. And in my assessment, at least, the situation is still extremely fragile. Russia, while it is having some difficulties, is making concrete progress on the battlefield in Ukraine. The Alaska summit, which was aiming to put an end to this war, was, in my assessment at least, a failure, and I would love to hear, of course, what my colleagues on the panel will say on that. And I think the Europeans at least managed to prevent the worst going to Washington, but let's also admit all of us Europeans being in Washington there and looking at the pictures from Washington, I think could see that there's very little trust across the Atlantic, and especially the Europeans do not trust the U.S. president at this stage. So I think that's sort of the first background where I see the situation. We haven't mentioned, I think, this morning the Chinese military parade, but I think it needs to be part of the strategic picture, China's rise also as a military power. The second point I want to make is that, of course, Europe hasn't sat idle. There have been substantial increases in investment in defense. These increases are very visible in GDP figures, but they are also very visible in concrete military procurement numbers. They've gone up really very significantly. A few years ago, European procurement literally was in the low double digits. Now we are really, we've really moved up and reach numbers of 100 billion or more. So investment into equipment, defense equipment, is really rising, and so is European and international production of defense products. So of weapons, basically. Now, if I look at, and we have published a study a few months ago on European defense procurement, if you look at European defense procurement, one thing that you will see is that while we typically buy European, or we typically buy national, we have very little cross-border spending, so very little European defense spending in neighboring countries. And we have a pretty significant technological dependence on the US when it comes to high-tech defense products. And so one, I think, big question is this technological dependency, but also the modernization need of our armies, where very often the procurement is still very much geared to, let's say, technologies that are still useful, but they might not be that useful anymore in only a few years. So let me just say we invest still relatively little, for example, in modern drone technology when you compare it with more traditional technology. So that's my second point. My third point is, of course, on the fiscal dimension. According to our commitments in NATO, we are supposed to increase spending on security and defense in a wide definition to 5% of GDP. Now, that is an extraordinary fiscal effort that I think we are not yet sure how we will achieve it, but I'm sure we will hear from our co-panelists how this will be achieved in the next years. So with me to discuss all of these issues is a stellar panel. We will start with Christi Reich. She's director of the International Center for Defense and Security. Then Bertrand Dumont, Director General of the French Treasury, will speak. And last but not least, Simona Satounas, Head of Cabinet of European Commissioner Kubilius, will talk about the European dimension. And so without much further ado, Christi, I do want to ask you where you, on a more strategic level, see the situation and what you think should be the next steps.
Thank you, Guntram, for the introduction, and very happy to be here. Happy birthday to Bruegel. So where are we as Europeans? I think this is a moment for Europe to redefine itself. When I was a student and a young researcher, it was all about normative power and soft power, and about how European integration was about making hard power and military force less relevant, first on the continent and then hopefully also globally. And now the world is moving in the opposite direction. And we realize that as Europeans, we need to be able to defend ourselves, and we need hard power if we want to maintain our soft power, and if we want to be able to defend our values and our way of life. Now, looking at the global environment, the previous panel already had a very good discussion on that. The rules-based order is under enormous strain. Great power competition is dominating the global politics, and sheer force and hard power are more relevant indeed than we Europeans are prepared for. And some things in this turbulent environment actually remain the same. For European security, the biggest threat is still Russia. And I happen to come from a neighboring country of Russia where we have had this threat perception for a long time. Today, we are in a situation where a shared understanding of the threat is, I think, stronger than it ever was. Excuse me. So this is a good basis to build our defense on. The autumn season is starting, apologies. So indeed, Russia remains a threat. Russia wants to redefine the European security order. It has made it very clear in its own statements, and it has not changed this goal. When we look at Russia's war against Ukraine, there is no quick end in sight, unfortunately, in spite of the US-led diplomatic efforts in recent months. I'm afraid we are not any closer to ceasefire. At this point, we need to prepare for the war to continue for maybe another year, maybe even more. And we need to continue putting pressure on Russia, increasing the cost of war for Russia, and of course, providing continued military support to the Ukrainians. The good news is that Russia is not winning in this war. The strategic victory that Russia was hoping to achieve, to destroy Ukraine as a sovereign state, and to indeed to redefine European security order, to achieve recognition of Russia's sphere of influence and to restore that sphere of influence as much as possible, Russia is not achieving that. But it is not losing either, in the sense that we don't see the possibility of a clear military defeat of Russia in Ukraine. So what is more likely at some point is that we will have a ceasefire, we will have a frozen conflict. Then it will be, to a large extent, up to Europeans to help Ukraine make sure that that situation can be stabilized and Ukraine can move on as a sovereign state and integrate with Europe. We will need Ukraine on our side in future to be able to defend Europe and to manage the Russian threat, to keep it under control and to clearly push back the aggressive intentions of Russia. So this is going to be a long-term fight, I'm afraid, but Europeans do have the resources. We just need to get our act together. Europeans are spending more on defense. This process still has to be speeded up. I come from a country where defense spending will be above 5% next year, and that is pure defense, proper defense spending, even without this distinction between 3.5 on defense proper and 1.5 on a broader definition of security. It's possible. And we continue to function as a democracy and as a society. We have a strong will to defend. We understand what the level of threat is and the necessity to deal with it. And just one final point. What has also not changed is that the US remains the strongest ally of Europe and an indispensable ally for the time being. And now it is a question of how fast Europeans will be able to strengthen their own capabilities in order to reduce the level of dependence, which indeed has become a problem for us, to put it mildly. The relationship, the transatlantic relationship, is changing in profound ways. We can no longer be sure if it is an alliance based on shared values, which is, I think, the strongest possible glue that can tie states together. Trust has been eroding very rapidly during this year, and yet at the moment we have no other option but to try to avoid any drastic change in the transatlantic alliance, try to keep the US engaged. We see it very well in the discussions on possible future security guarantees for Ukraine. We see it in the NATO framework. We still are dependent on key capabilities that only the US can provide.
Well, thank you so much, Christy, for these clear words. And I do want to come back to the point of the transatlantic relation later on, and in particular more push you all a little bit more on the prospects, and we discussed it a bit in the first panel, on the prospects of more integrated European defense. However, before I do this, I do want to give all the other speakers, and perhaps that question is also to Simonas in the end, but I did want to give first the floor to Bertrand, also because you mentioned as a very important second point, the point, Christy, that we have the resources in Europe. And so the question is, do we? I mean, yes, we are spending on defense. Yes, we have increased spending on defense. But yes, we also do face significant fiscal constraints in a number of member states. And in our democratic processes, it appears to be sometimes difficult to prioritize defense. Who would be better placed than Bertrand to talk about this issue with us today? Bertrand, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm just stating the obvious, but it's clearly a very relevant topic at the current juncture. Just to illustrate it, I am struck by the fact that, I mean, I've been attending through the years quite a number of finance ministers meeting, and I think for the last 10 years, I'm not sure we even discussed one time defense. And now for the last, let's say, 12 months, I think we've been discussing defense basically at every council of ministers, which gives an idea of the changes that we have seen in the last months, and we are discussing it obviously from a fiscal point of view, but also from an economic point of view, from a strategic point of view, and so I think it just gives an element or an insight on the evolution of the political awareness, the political importance of this question. At the same time, and I just picking up on your point, I think there is a bit of a contrast between the political awareness of the importance of this question of defense, of financing defense, and the realization by our citizens that this will require effort, choice, and possibly trade-off between the way states currently have built their budget and what we are aiming at in the current years. Just to give a couple of figures to begin with, today we had a very interesting figure from the European Defence Agency last week. In 2024, Europe spent about 1.9% of its GDP for defense. Last year it will be 2.1, which I think show the very significant evolution we are seeing, but of course 2.1 is still far from the 3.5 plus 1.5 target. This spending represents about 380 billion euros, to be compared to the 800 billion euros spent by the US. But compares well with the 250 billion euros spent by China, meaning that Europe is spending more for its defense by China today. So it's something I think we need to keep this in mind. So, of course, the question is, how are we going to finance this huge effort, getting from 2.1 to 3.5 plus 1.5? And how can we do it in a clever manner and to have a meaningful impact, not only on our strategic economy, but also on our economies? The first thing I think we need is to recognize that this will not be entirely achieved at European level. It will be partly done at member state level and partly at European level. This is very clear. But clearly, I think there is a European added value in the approach. Christy, you referred to the common challenges, the common threat we are facing. I think that now defense is somehow seen as a common good, and which deserve a proper European investment. And I think that the rearm package from the Commission illustrates the way that you can have an interconnection between a European member state level and a European and a clearly European approach, with the flexibility on the fiscal rules, and at the same time through the SAFE, a European instrument. So first, recognizing that there is a true European added value. Second point, coordinating spending, the scale effect, avoiding redundancies, common projects, common research are of the essence if we want to do this in an efficient manner. I do recognize that we will not get to joint procurement in every area or next year, but I think that it's very important that in an incremental manner we do more and more spending in a coordinated manner, within a strictly European framework or based on bilateral cooperation between member states. Luckily enough, there is already a number of these cooperations going on, and I think, of course, we need to increase them to scale them up. The third point, which is critical, is, of course, that we need to build a strategic autonomy. And the translation or the illustration of this strategic autonomy in finance and economy is, of course, building a more robust European technology and defense industry. Here again, we are not starting from nothing. We already have a robust base. We have world-class actors. The conflict in Ukraine has demonstrated that including a country like Ukraine can step up its defense industry. But clearly, this should be at the core of our objective, to be less dependent on external providers, third country providers, for these kind of goods. For economic reasons, but I would also argue for strategic reasons, because sometimes there are strings attached to weapons when they come from third countries. Then, of course, the question is how in practice we will do this. Just a couple of points. clearly, decision will have to be taken at national level by member states. The starting point from each member state is pretty different. For some member states, there is a neutrality principle enshrined in the constitution. The level of spending is pretty different from one country to another. The role of defense, I would say, in the political economy of each country is obviously different. So this should be the starting point. But here again, I think there is a lot we can do at EU level. The MFF should not be a missed opportunity from this point of view, and I think that the current proposal of the Commission offers good opportunities, or very interesting opportunity, in particular when you look at the competitiveness fund to increase and scale up the defense spending. It will require a proper governance, but I think it's something we should build on. The third principle, in practice, I think we should do every effort to promote scale and to promote innovation. The US have been extremely good as using defense as a catalyst for more innovation in their economy. There are hundreds of examples of innovation that are coming from the defense sector. There is no reason why we cannot do the same in Europe. So promoting innovation, promoting SMEs, which are today not where they should be in terms of contribution to the European defense is also a key principle. And my final point is to say that we would favor building on existing structure rather than inventing new ones. The SAFE instrument is an interesting example. I think that we have created a lot of agency structure in the defense sector. We would be cautious in the idea of advocating for a new structure, but rather focusing on what we have today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think there was a lot of food for thought there. Of course, let me just echo one point, which I think is 2 points, which I think are really central from a purely economic perspective. I mean, one point you mentioned very strongly and several times is the issue of scale. Do we have a fragmented market where sort of essentially, which is the current situation, where essentially every country buys with only its own domestic industry, and then whatever is too big and too complicated is being bought in the US? Or do we get some sort of a structure where we get actual trans-European or a European market for defense products? I think that's the sort of one key issue, and it relates very much to the cost and fiscal dimension, right? Because if we overpay for defense by having low numbers and high prices, then, of course, the fiscal effort will have to be even larger and the political backlash even more complicated than it is in the first place. The other point that I did want to pick up on is the point you made on innovation. I think it's there is increasing evidence that defense spending does lead to long-term and does contribute to long-term growth through its effects on research and development. There's a very nice paper in the American Economic Review recently published that shows positive long-term growth effects of research and development in defense spending. So I think there are some upsides to the whole agenda we are talking about. I do want to mention that you can ask questions on slido.com #defense, but we are still not at the stage of questions because we have a third speaker, Simonas. You are an insider into this debate from a European perspective, and of course we've heard already the mentioning of the SAFE instrument, which I think can be at some level considered a success in the sense that 150 billion, the full amount, was requested by member states. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about that instrument and what's the next step after it. And of course, any consideration you have on the more strategic landscape, but also on the rearmament speed and the attempts to get towards more integrated procurement and more coordinated procurement would be very much appreciated. Simonas, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Well, thank you. I think, first of all, maybe why we are all doing this. I think, first of all,
Hold the mic a little bit closer.
I'm sorry, yes. So looking at the mission letter or the political guidelines of the Commission, it's clearly there are challenges that we need to address. And here it's interesting challenges. There are geopolitical challenges, but there are industrial-based challenges, efficiency challenges. So I think the objective for this SAFE instrument, what we tabled, what we proposed, and really it's a success, there are like 3 objectives. One objective to help member states to fill in the capability gaps based on their NATO gaps or their capabilities. So these are instruments that should help member states if they really politically commit to fill in the capability gaps. Second thing, like you correctly mentioned, we all know the Draghi report. We all know about European defense industrial base. Yes, it's fragmented. I would say maybe just to add up what you were saying, not like all member states are buying from themselves, because some member states don't have industry at all, and they will probably never will be able to develop at that level. But despite of that, we still need to have much more efficient spending of the national money and European Union money. So that's why SAFE instrument has a second element, is joint procurement with a very clear joint procurement requirements. And the third thing is strategic autonomy. We're not mentioning strategic autonomy, but we are talking about spending more European. So that's why this SAFE instruments clearly has a very clear eligibility criteria for the products. 65% of the product has to be developed here. Then there are certain requirements here, I mean European Union. And then with the partners, certain partners, we deliberately were able to offer the Ukrainian defense industrial base is also 100% eligible to be, that we use, the member states use the funds to Ukraine as well, Norway as well. And then we're going to develop the partnerships on the bilateral basis with certain countries that express their interest. So here are the 3 objectives. Now, I think this proposal by Commission, as you mentioned, was really very well received by the member states. It was very quickly adopted in the Council. Now we are in the implementation stage. Now the member states are coming to us and indicating how much funds they want to take from the SAFE loan. And the next level will be much more interesting, I would say. It will be what European defense industry has never saw before. It's really going to be a grow of demand even more, because member states will start coming to us with a very concrete national defense investment plans, what they want to buy, with whom they want to buy, and when they want to buy. I think what is more important to highlight that we also looking at the overall picture, what are the capability gaps based again on the NATO requirements and what member states are indicated. In the SAFE instrument, we indicated 9 areas of capabilities. So these 9 areas is where we clearly see that member states need a help or incentivization to fill in these gaps. So I would say since the beginning of this year, white paper, SAFE instrument, then other things that we've done on the defense ecosystem to become, well, maybe less burdensome for the industry, still to come, because still we in the legislative process with the European Parliament. But I would say SAFE is a big beginning, but clearly not the end, because with SAFE instrument, we're incentivizing member states to fill in the gaps, what they see themselves now. But probably the bigger question is at strategic level, that we were a little bit alluding while we are in a strong transatlantic alliance right now, but we probably need to be ready to develop other capabilities beyond the national capabilities and to be able to be ready for various contingencies.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I see there's already lots of questions coming in. 2 questions I think help me phrase my my next question to you, Christy. One is on what would it take to win the war in Ukraine, and would that even be possible without the US? So that's one question. And the second is what about a European army? And you know, I do want to, and they are both connected and relate to your I think first big point about the indispensability of the United States, while at the same time you also acknowledge, well, the transatlantic relation is really changing, and that's a very polite way of putting it. I think basically trust has eroded completely, and we are in a space where on the one hand we do seem to be very much dependent. I think observers from your region of Europe are particularly aware of the fact how dependent we are, while on the other hand we don't feel we can really trust them, right, the Americans. So Daniela this morning said, well, Daniela Schwarzer said, well, we won't really have a European army, which I think is probably a fair assessment. But where in between can we find a solution? I mean, where do you see Europe's capacities to more deeply coordinate our defensive capabilities, European NATO? I mean, perhaps not a joint command, but a coordinated command, joint assets, satellite infrastructure, communication infrastructure, cyber infrastructure behind it. I mean, there's many sort of zones in between sort of one single European army and complete dependence on the United States. Where would you land, and where do you think can we realistically go?
So, thank you. Many big questions. Let me start with the war in Ukraine. Where we are right now is that we, Ukrainians, together with its Western supporters, are not able to stop Russian advance. I mean, it's a very slow advance. At this pace, it would take decades for Russia to even, achieve the goal of conquering all these 4 oblasts in Ukraine that it claims for itself. And yet, Russia keeps advancing. So what does it take to stop that, first of all? I'm afraid the US is not interested in a clear defeat of Russia. It was actually not interested in that under the Biden administration either, and certainly not under the current administration. So what does it mean for Ukrainians and Europeans? I think the most important priority is to keep strengthening Ukraine's own military. It's amazing how well the Ukrainians have been able to defend themselves and also to multiply their defense industry. So this is, I think, one of the really promising avenues for European defense to cooperate more closely with the Ukrainians. There are many examples of that already happening at the level of enterprises. And then we need also, of course, in future, some clear European commitments with including presence on the ground in Ukraine, but that's a discussion about the future. And again, we have seen how difficult it is for Europeans to find sufficient level of commitments. The amount of land forces in Europe is very limited, and also the political will to make commitments is very limited. And I think it's still really important to keep the US engaged and not focus too much on how we would manage this without the US. But of course, keeping the US engaged has to go together with strengthening European and including Ukrainian capability. Then on this issue of the transatlantic bond and the European army, I fully agree with Daniela's assessment that we won't see a kind of deep integration in the field of defense. We won't see a European army. Decisions on war and peace, on using military force, are going to be made at the national level. But this has been the case for forever, and in the NATO framework, this has not prevented NATO from becoming a very strong defense alliance and having common defense plans which have provided credible deterrence. It is working, and of course NATO remains the main framework for European countries to further develop their capabilities to fill the gaps. And as we heard, the EU now comes in with its instruments to help member states fill these gaps while taking into account their commitments in NATO. So this all goes hand in hand, and I think it's also a very positive development that we have moved beyond this discussion on, whether to strengthen European defense in the NATO framework or whether to develop something alternative in the EU at the European level. I don't think this is a relevant question even. Now, one final issue I want to raise is, I think we all agree Europe needs stronger defense capabilities, but then there is this tension between the urgent need to acquire more capabilities and where can we get these capabilities from? A lot of it comes from outside Europe. And this is, for example, what Poland has been doing, purchasing from the US, from South Korea. And there is no short-term other alternative than relying a lot on the external. And then there is the long-term goal to produce more in Europe. And that's, of course, where, once again, the EU comes in with its instruments. But this is a slow process, and sometimes it is difficult to find the right balance between the kind of short-term and long-term needs.
Yeah, thank you so much for that clear answer and also frank assessment. I want to turn to you, Simonas, and ask you about this last point, namely the import dependency on the United States and how you see the interplay between, and here's a question on the need for strategic autonomy in defense and how that fits with the EU-US trade deal, which supposedly foresees that Europe buys more American, not weapons, but at least more energy and invests in the US. And I guess there's some implicit understanding also on defense. And of course, just to give you the numbers, I mean, with Juan Mejino Lopez, we will publish in the coming weeks a piece looking at US foreign military sales. And what you see in US foreign military sales is that Europe has become basically the biggest customer of the United States for these advanced tech products. And in Europe, it is not France, it is, as you mentioned, it's Poland, it's many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Germany to some extent. Not that big, actually. Poland is really one of the biggest here. So I think there is certainly a tension here on trying to develop more European tech, for which we will have to direct European demand to European companies. Of course, the scarcity of available supply at the moment in Europe, which drives our dependency on US supply. So how do we navigate this going forward?
I think that the situation is not so dramatic, and it's changing, and it's going to change very, very fast. We see clearly that already now industry is getting strong signals from the member states, from the political leaders, that they're going to spend more. Some part of Europe is already spending more, and we see that there are a lot of defense industrial bases being growing in where it is already now, but there are also new defense industries that are moving in the areas where, well, the frontline countries, where these countries are going to spend more and to try to localize a lot of defense industrial base. Now, I think that this exactly European instrument SAFE is going clearly to incentivize spending much more here European. Yes, 150 billion euros is not enormous amount, but it's a very clear signal for European defense industrial base and our partners globally that we have a preference and we want to do the preference. So I believe that 150 billion euros and SAFE instrument will just create impetus and a broader base for European defense industrial base to grow. And then the second part comes in, clearly it's in the hands of the member states, national decisions. Sometimes they are making national decisions based on the geopolitical considerations, sometimes because there is not off as a supply on the table. And it's not that some member states, we know that they're buying not only from United States, but from some other partners globally. But that's why I think that instrument SAFE will trigger much more spending in Europe, but also member states will start spending in Europe as well, due to other geopolitical or new geopolitical circumstances. The only thing is that I think critical is the political will. instruments are coming on the table. They can be used. Now it's the political will, and sometimes there is a political will which is also differently transformed from the sense of urgency. We clearly see that certain part of Europe feels a certain sense of urgency, and they are committed to spend more. Yes, we're looking at front line. Other part of Europe still, I think, in the making in the future, I hope, and that's why NATO summit with a commitment to have up to 5% by 2035 is an expression of political will. Now the question of implementation.
So I will take 3 questions from the live audience in a second. Before I do this, I do have one last question to Bertrand. I think one question here is on the European Investment Bank, which you might want to answer very quickly, or European Defence Bank. But I think the European Defence Bank question leads to sort of the question that Jeromin Zettelmeier and I and Armin Steinbach pushed in a recent piece, where we call for some sort of a European defence mechanism, where the aim is to remove the barriers between European countries and sort of Europeanize the market for defense products. And of course, the differences in views between France and Germany are one of the key sort of issues in really advancing deeper integration. We've seen that there are numerous attempts to create joint projects, such as, for example, the next generation fighter jets, etc., etc. But it's difficult processes, right? And it's very difficult processes also because every country has a very sort of strong view on what is critical technology that needs to remain on the soil of our own countries. So walk us a bit through your thinking how we do this. I mean, France certainly doesn't have that dependency on the US, which I think is very visible in the data. But where can we go from here?
Well, a lot of questions. No, I just wanted first to agree with Simonas on the fact that if we give through European instruments visibility to the defense sector, and of course, also a true commitment from government that in the future we will buy more European, and through this European preference element, I think we are giving the necessary visibility for the medium long term that you are referring to, Christy, that, well, we are serious about it. It's not for 1 year or for 2 years. It's a real challenge that we want to address, and that it makes sense for them, well, to work together to address these challenges in a European perspective, and that, well, European project, European common research should be at the core of the approach. Then, to your point, clearly the starting point is not easy. We have very strong national tradition in this area, and to a certain extent, rightly so. It's about defense, and we know that decisions regarding defense are taken at national level, and of course are sovereign decision. But approaching it, I think, from the financial, fiscal, economic angle also is a way to, in a progressive manner, promote more European approach without, let's say, impinging on the core defense decision. And to your question, clearly joint projects, joint research is not easy. It's not given, and we know it. But at the same time, if I look at the current landscape from a French perspective, what we are doing together with Italy, with Belgium, with Germany, we already have quite a number of success stories, which clearly demonstrate that this is feasible. This is not easy. You have to overcome some obstacles. Sometimes let's also recognize that the defense industry prefers to have a dialogue with its own government, with all the advantages seen from their standpoint of such a dialogue, but I think they can also recognize that having a more European approach will deliver the scale elements that is also critical for them. Then on a question on the EIB, I think that the recent evolution that we have seen in the EIB with a a broader mandate, more financing, a more constructive approach of dual use is a very interesting element, and it's striking to see the number of projects that have been approved in the recent months by the EIB board in the area of defense that clearly show that we can do a lot more. Finally, on the defense mechanism, here again, a lot of ideas. I think what matters is that to be sure that there is a financial advantage and a governance advantage to new structure, which is not easy to demonstrate because it's a very specific sector. Investors are looking at it with an element of cautiousness, let's recognize it, and to be sure that these kind of mechanisms really delivers benefits as opposed to, let's say, regular EU member states approach is of course, well, what will make the decision possible or not when it comes to these proposals.
Okay, we have 3 questions from the audience, and really please ask short questions. And I see 2 Bruegel colleagues, and then Herr Geissert, Elena.
Thank you very much, Elena Rybakova from Bruegel. Is there political appetite to socialize Ukraine's defense spending? Arguably, Ukraine resisting Russia is giving time for Europe to rearm. It's also cheaper production. There is a solution of interoperability. And also, Ukraine spends about $100 billion on defense at the moment, and it's unlikely it's going to have to slow down significantly. Next year, it's running out of money to be able to continue. Thank you.
Jacob.
Jacob Kierkegaard from Bruegel as well. I just want to a question, and perhaps a comment from anyone to on the panel. This basic dumb luck.
Question.
Yes, the dumb luck that we have in Europe, namely that the divergent willingness of to spend more on defense is very closely related to obviously adjacency to Russia. Unfortunately, so is much of the available fiscal space in Europe. So what we're seeing is basically that the countries that are with fiscal space, Germany, Nordics, etc. Poland is an interesting exception, actually has a major deficit, but also is a high growth, low debt economy. Some can spend or chooses to spend, even though it has a high primary deficit. But isn't the reality here that the countries in Europe with fiscal space and a threat perception of Russia will just go ahead and do it? They will just spend. And there isn't going to be much role for the EU. I applaud the creation of the SAFE instrument, but the reality is that it's a loan instrument, which means that it's mostly appealing to non-Euro area members. It's basically tailored to Poland, Romania, ironically also Hungary, and I suspect that we will see that most of these countries will take up most of the loans. But the role for the EU to have an institutional leap stumbling forward here is very limited. Basically, it's not there.
Okay, so I guess that's for Simonas, and then Herr Geissert, please.
Thank you. Kurt Geissert, I'm one of the guides in the House of European History. I had a group of German students on Monday. There was a comparison between First World War, 1914 to 1980, and war in Ukraine, which lost already 3.5 years. The question of the group was, is there an alternative that one day there will be negotiations with Russia which should lead to compromises, including territory in East Ukraine? Thank you.
Okay, that last question is for you, Christy, I guess. So please, Simonas, do you want to start perhaps?
Yes, maybe I will start with Ukraine. Yes, we all know that there are, Ukrainians has limited capabilities to fund their military capabilities. Yes, we are stepping in, like Europeans, European Commission, United States. But I would like to mention the SAFE instrument. Why? Because we intentionally put that Ukrainian defense industrial base is fully eligible, that we Europeans, if we want, if the member states would like to buy, then can buy Ukrainian stuff using these SAFE loans. So that, in our view, will help, first of all, defense industrial base of Ukrainians to grow, because they have a very well-developed industrial base. It's not fully yet loaded with the contracts. Second thing, much more money will flow in the economy, and then we'll probably get cheaper, but more, in some cases, maybe battle-tested capabilities. And that's why, so this instrument was constructed like this. So member states now coming to us, and they're indicating, some of them, that indicated quite a number of them, that they will like to do with that. Yes, we don't know yet how much they're going to spend, because now they're just indicating the amounts, how much they would in generally would like to take from safe loan instrument, but then we'll see how kind of what kind of a defense, national defense investment plans they will start to come to us, from where they would like to buy. So we're clearly encouraging them to do more with Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are really very active, also engaging with the member states. So I hope that it might be wisely used, but still, again, it's a political decision at some countries, how to avoid nationalization, but how to have them spending more. So we will clearly to push on that. And then on the fiscal space, yes, it's a phenomena. Again, I would say a very strange but maybe dangerous phenomena, because yes, frontline countries, they feel the biggest threat, but at the same time they still need to abide to the fiscal rules as it is. That's why we also proposed another instrument, this national escape clause for member states to flexibilize the fiscal rules there. I think it's 15 member states who asked for that. Probably member states would like to spend more, so clearly it's not enough what that rule will allow. But I'm more concerned about that, why only this part of Europe has to take a responsibility, while these are also clearly protecting our internal market. So I think it's a good, maybe for the future, for you to debate and also to find a way. I mean, about the burden sharing. That's a very critical question, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and we see that the correlation between defense spending and the miles to Moscow is actually very, very high, right? So at the end, but the good message is, I think Jakub has a point there, is that at least the countries that are close to Russia have some fiscal space, but in a sense, you're right. At some stage, they were the rest is free riding basically on the defense efforts of those countries. Bertrand, perhaps a few words on also on the question of fiscal solidarity with Ukraine. I think that's an important one.
Sure. No, perhaps just on this fiscal effort of the member state, I think it's not only about countries on the front line. I think in France we've been spending quite a lot of money on defense for the last decades, and but clearly some countries where we see very low numbers need to step up that effort. This is a common good. I think there's this common challenge, common threat that has been said, and I think that a political decision will be warranted at some point, and it's not possible to have such a discrepancy among member states, because at the end of the day, obviously, defense will be ensured collectively within NATO, not within NATO, but in the medium term, clearly at EU level. Second point, Ukraine. So clearly, Europe has provided a lot of help, a lot of support to Ukraine, more than the US. It's not only well known, but it's more than US. So far, Europe, member states, European level has brought something like 167 billion euros to Ukraine, 167, as opposed to 114 for the US. And clearly, the question is what will come next. And there is no issue for 2025. The question is more for 2026 and later. So far, the backbone of the support to Ukraine has been the IMF program, and I think that as European, we brought a lot financially, politically to this program in terms of support, financial support, but also political support. And now what we need to see is how we can support Ukraine through a new program. keeping in mind that the level of indebtedness of Ukraine is already very significant. So I'm not sure that loans are still possible. So it's going to be about grant, which is more complex from a political and also fiscal point of view. And there is, of course, a big question mark on the U.S. support in the coming months, and this will be very much, I think, at the core of the discussion of finance minister in the coming months, to see how, because I think there is a clear political will to maintain the support to Ukraine, but how we can translate this into a meaningful and robust IMF program in the next months.
Thank you. Christy.
Thank you. First, just to add one more element to this question of how to support Ukraine. There are the frozen assets of Russia, 200 billion approximately. So, of course, I don't want to go deep into that discussion, but I think it's a really interesting case also because it is about the readiness for Europeans to take risks, to find creative solutions, to think long-term. We know that supporting Ukraine will be increasingly shouldered by the Europeans. The US will not be willing to pay anymore, and we need to find the ways to do it. Now, on this question of negotiations, thanks for the question. I know it sounds very tempting to many Europeans that why don't Ukrainians cede some territory for peace? But unfortunately, at this point, this option, this path does not exist. Russia is not interested in negotiating. Russia is only interested in Ukraine's capitulation. So even if Ukraine were to announce at this point that, okay, we are ready for a concession, give up some of our territory, this won't actually bring a peace where Ukraine would still continue to exist as an independent state. Ukrainians actually do have shifted in their views. I mean, more and more Ukrainians are ready to accept in the end an outcome where Russia would continue to occupy part of Ukraine's territory. But in order for this kind of outcome to work for Ukraine, then we need to have a very clear answer to the question of security guarantees to Ukraine, how to make sure that if we get to that point, first we need to get Russia to be willing to negotiate in earnest, which we are not there yet. We need to increase pressure on Russia. We have seen, for example, in recent weeks, how successfully Ukrainians have been hitting Russia's oil production capacity, going after the major companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, and really cutting up to 20% of Russian production. So this kind of approach is, I think, the way to go to further reduce Russia's ability to wage war, Russia's resources, but it won't lead to a rapid change of the situation. And then, indeed, at the same time, we need to, as Europeans, we need to have better answers to this issue of security guarantees to have a long-term solution.
Thank you so much. I mean, perhaps just to add one last point on the leaving territory to Russia. I mean, of course, any territory you leave might be also, or some of the territory that you leave might be also territory that is actually at the moment heavily fortified. And so some of the territory that the Russians have proposed to President Trump as a sort of part of the bargain is exactly the kind of territory that Ukraine has been particularly effective in defending in the last 4 years. And so giving that up means concretely very negative military perspective for Ukraine, and therefore aggravates the situation even more. Yeah. You want to add perhaps one word on that?
Just a very tiny addition. Indeed, what I meant was the territories that are now occupied by Russia. There is, in principle, increased readiness in Ukraine to consider compromises. But then when it comes to giving away territories that Russia has not been able to conquer during these 3.5 years of war, that is out of the question.
Okay. Okay, we discussed a lot of topics and it's been a fascinating debate. Thank you so much to our three panelists and thank you for the great questions. Until next time.